I can't wait to read GameSpot's review of the latest NBA 2K game, said absolutely no one ever. And that's really the problem with modern reviews. Gone are the days when the gaming world looked at these reviewers as scholars of sentiment, as nowadays they're little more than Metacritic number feeders designed to screw overworked, underpaid developers out of their promised bonuses. However, there are still a few respected game journalists out there who will gladly put their neck on the line in the pursuit of honesty, at the behest of publishers, some of which, sadly, pay the ultimate price for their candour. Well, there's one who totally deserved it, but you'll see his exploits later in the video. So, this episode, we take a look at these banished beat pounders, these fired freelancers, and these cold contributors. As I say, but hello you. I'm Guru Larry, and I welcome you to Fact Hunt. 3 game journalists fired for having an opinion. Now, I know immediately what you fact hunters are thinking. Larry, you've covered this before. Is this what it's come to in these times? Reheating old scripts and throwing them at us like so many scraps to a dog? But then if I was to leave old Jeff out completely, I would have people screaming about that too, asking how I could have possibly ignored him. So, in short, it's impossible to do a video like this and not cover one of gaming's most infamous and unjust firings. One that, in the end, turned out to benefit basically everyone involved. So, let's go back in time to the mid-2000s. In these old days when YouTube was still largely a place where people deposited grainy videos of their cats, and having 100 subscribers could get you invited to E3. Remember these guys? GameSpot were one of the first websites to hit Web 2.0 and go all in on video reviews. You can now actually see the journalists who are telling you about the games you're interested in. Instead of just reading their words, they're now reading those words out to you. They may not necessarily be the most photogenic of people, but it sure helped to see them, as well as the game that they were talking about. One of GameSpot's foremost writers, and indeed editors, Jeff Gerstmann, could now have his double chin enjoyed in glorious 240p 2060 vision. However, not everyone was too happy about that. The groundwork for Gerstmann getting canned actually started over a year before the event happened. It's possible, in fact, to do a mini fact hunt featuring the separate groups who wanted to get Gerstmann fired. And who was the first group? Why, Nintendo fanboys, of course. In 2006, Jeff reviewed The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess. Had a fair amount of critical stuff to say about it, but Gerstmann ultimately liked it and gave it 8.8 out of 10.
Twilight Princess is a great game that anyone considering buying a Wii should definitely check out. It's got a ton of that classic Zelda feel, but maybe it has a little too much of it for its own good. You'll love the game's great design and puzzles, but you'll probably also have the feeling that it could have been so much more with some presentational additions.
Giving a Zelda game anything less than the perfect score caused unadulterated rage with Nintendo fanboys, who flooded the era's most popular hangout for idiots and simpletons alike, the GameFAQs message board, with rage. I mean, just check out some of these thread titles. Jeff, if you can see these posts, you better find a new job, you fat ass. Jeff was abused as a child. Fat ass Jeff and GameSpot can go fuck themselves. And the classic, F you Jeff, you ugly fat piece of shit, go effing fall off a bridge and die you, Nigel. Posted by the catchily named Hooey Hoo Ha Ha Ha. Yeah, that one. I think you get the picture. Zelda fans were utterly enraged that Jeff had not kneeled down to suck on the toes of the newest entry in the franchise, so they sent all this, and more, the way of him and GameSpot. Everything from insults about his girth, to petitions for his firing, and even bloody death threats. But Jeff didn't just piss off these short-fused gamers, he vexed companies too. When a poor innocent reviewer named Aaron Thomas gave Ratchet & Clank Future Tools of Destruction a perfectly acceptable 7.5 out of 10, Sony were utterly fuming about it and complained to GameSpot's bosses about the low score. And because Gerstmann was in charge of editorial, these bosses would call him into the office for a dressing down over it. These faceless executives apparently didn't have much of a clue how to deal with companies who were angry about bad reviews. And they certainly weren't going to actually side with their staff on these matters. I mean, that would just be silly, wouldn't it? But that's not to say everyone else inside GameSpot were happy with Gerstmann. The marketing department were annoyed with him too. After all, they were the ones who were getting chewed out by angry games companies, and then complaining to the management about it. And to think, it all stemmed from Jeff's policy that a scale from 1 to 10 should be used in full, as opposed to giving 7 out of 10s to games that were virtually unplayable like everyone else. And so, all of this led up to the straw that broke the camel's back. The marketing department goes in with Eidos to stick a big, garish, massive display of their newest game, Kane and Lynch Dead Men, on the background of their site. But then, what does that bloody independent thinking Gerstmann do? He only gives it a fair rating of 6 out of 10. The bastard.
It's a fairly standard shooter that doesn't really have mechanics that live up to the standards of the genre. If you're a fan of shooters, you're probably just going to be frustrated by a lot of the things that this game does wrong. But that said, the multiplayer is really neat and something that's probably worth seeing. So if you do have an opportunity to see it without paying full price, take a look at it, but it's probably not worth the purchase.
He does this disgusting act because, well, Kane and Lynch Dead Men was a bit crap, wasn't it? I mean, even IO Interactive thought it was rubbish, and they made the thing. But this would be the end for Gerstmann. His bosses called him into their office and gave him the chop. Jeff Gerstmann was fired for, well, thinking a game was average. Rumours immediately flew around about the reasons for Gerstmann's firing, and the press reaction against GameSpot was quite staggering. Because even though it would take another 5 years for those rumours to officially be confirmed, it was bloody obvious that's what had happened. Not least because Gerstmann's GameSpot buddies Brad Shoemaker, Vinny Caravella, Alex Navarro and Ryan Davis all left with him, very unreasonably saying that they couldn't work for a company that actually fired journalists because of advertising pressure. Of course, this quintet would then make up Giant Bomb in 2008. Everyone loved their antics and their shockingly controversial honest ratings for games, and they continue to do so today. While GameSpot, who everyone now hated, would eventually can those faceless executives and spend the next few years reapplying for admission to the Not a Bunch of Utter Tossers Club. All is calmer nowadays, at least, especially now that Giant Bomb and GameSpot are both owned by the same media conglomerate, CBS Interactive. There's no hard feelings nowadays, and Jeff even liked the second Kane and Lynch game. Everyone's still writing about games, and Jeff Gerstmann is still a threat. He always will be. I think most of us can agree that Jeff Gerstmann didn't deserve to get the sack for having an opinion, but our next one, he most certainly did. How so? Well, the title of this video is 3 journalists who are fired for having an opinion. But that doesn't mean the opinion the journalist has is necessarily their own. This is a man who had lots of opinions, and most of them belonged to other people. It's time to look at the case of Filip Miucin, a former YouTuber who amassed quite the following before being hired by IGN as their Nintendo editor, and then blown it all to smithereens in a blaze of white-hot plagiarism. The trouble for Filip started in August 2018, when he reviewed the very popular Dead Cells on Nintendo Switch. On the surface, the review appeared to be perfectly fine. Well, unless you were a YouTuber by the name of Boomstick Gaming, who quickly realised that Filip's review of the game was copied virtually word for word from his own, which he posted just a couple of weeks previously. Understandably aggrieved, he highlighted this on social media and made a video all about it, which almost immediately got picked up by sites like Reddit and discussed at length by YouTube commentaries. Everyone from Yongyi to Jim Sterling got their grills out and readied themselves for a good old-fashioned spit roasting of the culprit. While it's often unusual to credit IGN for all that much, they acted pretty quickly on this, removing Miucin's Dead Cell review after investigating it and finding it was indeed a copy. Barely a day after Boomstick Gaming had made a stink and posted his video, Filip Miucin had been unceremoniously booted out of the door. But the whole thing was far from over. IGN proceeded to investigate the other content that Filip Miucin had made during his employment and found that, with no exaggeration, almost all of it had been half-inched from elsewhere. Almost no one was safe from Miucin's fingers. Sites such as Engagement and Nintendo Life had previous reviews nicked for his work, and even some of the industry's best regarded voices like Jeremy Parish weren't safe from having their work thieved. Miucin was so desperate for content he'd even steal from forums. A video about how Nintendo Switch's HD Rumble feature pinched word for word from a post on NeoGAF. He even stole work from other articles on IGN. One wonders if our friend Filip even had a single thought in his head that wasn't from another person. Having been caught so thoroughly with his pants down, you might have thought that Filip Miucin would, at the very least, own up to his antics. Instead, he behaved like a child caught with his hand in a cookie jar, releasing a complete non-apology of a video that blamed just about everything but his own lack of morals, even trying to turn the gun on those utter meanies who called him out in the first place. He owned up to Dead Cells, but just about nothing else, even singling out Kotaku's editor Jason Schreier for claiming that his FIFA 18 review had been nicked from Nintendo Life, which, of course, it was.
You can keep looking, Kotaku, and please let me know if you find anything. Which, by the way, their news editor, Jason Schreier, tried to imply that my FIFA 18 review was also inauthentic by claiming that I copied it from Nintendo Life, and that's just so not the case. I mean, maybe he was implying that if you have similarly opinionated reviews, then you're just plagiarizing, or maybe he's just trying to get as many clicks off of my name right now as possible.
After a few days of investigation, IGN's executive editor of reviews made the decision to remove everything Filip Miucin had created on their websites because, well, it was all suspect. After getting to a point beyond parody where people had figured out that even Filip's CV on LinkedIn had been pretty much lifted from a generic template, it was pretty clear to most anyone that Filip Miucin's game career was in tatters. Well, everyone except Filip Miucin, seemingly. For a couple of months after the incident, and after removing his non-apology because it went down like a sumo wrestler slipping on a banana skin, he tried to soldier on with his YouTube channel as if nothing had actually happened, hoping that the comments about plagiarism would go away. Which, of course, they didn't. Not just every video, but every tweet, every Instagram photo, literally any appearance of his head above the parapet would be filled with nothing but jokes about the content being nicked, or thoroughly vicious insults that would have made Jeff Gerstmann think he got off lightly from those Zelda fans. The internet never forgets. Well, certainly not after 2 bloody months anyway. A whole 8 months after being fired by IGN, Filip Miucin did actually release a proper apology, where he admitted to everything beyond simply Dead Cells, and apologised for any hurt he caused. Perhaps he hoped that, in doing this, he would put himself on the long road towards absolution. But it was too late for that. And the jokes about whether this apology had been nicked from some apology template website that seemingly every high-profile figure gets their apologies from will continue without mercy. Filip gamely tried to carry on for a few more videos, but he's posted nothing since August of 2019, and as of this video's posting, he could be considered inactive. It's kind of hard to imagine that he has any sort of future in the games industry at all, really. So, what have we all learned from this? Is there some sort of moral to this story? Well, games journalism can be tough. It may be incredibly hard to write something original about what's seemingly the 2 millionth FIFA game to be squirted out of EA's engorged udders, But that certainly doesn't mean you can steal somebody else's desperate words. And finally, we have someone who doesn't actually describe themselves as a games journalist, but they've spent many a year talking about games and getting a pretty good following for doing so. The erstwhile Glaswegian Robert Florence. Now, Robert's had rather passionate opinions on games and the games industry ever since the days when he stuck a cheap mic on a coat hanger and made Consolevania, one of the internet's first video game shows with his buddy Ryan. He's certainly not afraid of a good argument either. In fact, admittedly, he's even had a few run-ins in the past with yours truly. But he's certainly achieved many things, such as getting to say bummed in the gob on live TV during a discussion about Rockstar's controversial plastic bag-em-up, Manhunt.
Well, don't get me wrong, Manhunt is a very violent game. I mean, it's a game that features people getting bludgeoned to death, people getting bombed in the gob, people getting garroted, it's a nasty game.
While Rab generally isn't a games journalist, he did spend a good few months earning a freelancer's wage writing a column for Eurogamer in 2012 called Lost Humanity. Rab would use his 1,500 weekly words to talk about a whole grab bag of topics, ranging from the current state of games television, in short it would thoroughly Costa del Blowfly, to various then current games that he thoroughly enjoyed, such as Dishonored, Dark Souls, Hotline Miami, popular Japanese game Dark Souls, Hard Reset, and, of course, From Software's much talked about 2011 action RPG Dark Souls. And of course there was screeds about things which irritated him, everything from the rather sad state of the Scottish games industry to the over-reliance of booth babes at industry expos. There was even room for a good few digs at his considerably more dishonest brother in male pattern baldness, Peter Molyneux. However, Robert's ill-fated 18th column, titled A Table of Doritos, would once again focus on things that annoyed him about the world of games. Specifically, in this case, games journalism. He used the now famous image of a listless, utterly dead behind the eyes Jeff Keighley promoting Halo 4 while surrounded by bags of the popular maize-based snack to make comments on the ease at which games journalists could seemingly be bought in order to say positive things about people's products. His main focus was about a recent event at the UK's Games Media Awards, where games journalists used a hashtag that promoted a game in their tweets. Said hashtag users could then potentially win a free PS3. Naturally, this event caused quite a stink on social media, with most of the games journalists who won PS3s giving them away. But in Rab's eyes, the damage was done. However, this was just the start of a 20-hit combo that would result in his ousting. In his article, Rab mentions a particular journalist who had taken part in the campaign. While not outright condemning them, he did mention it was harder to trust the words of this journalist and others who'd taken part. This journalist then used the UK's utterly draconian libel laws to complain and file a legal threat with Eurogamer. Because of these laws, the website didn't exactly have much choice but to remove the portion of Robert Florence's column that mentioned the journalist and issue an apology. And you'll be shocked to know that these libel laws haven't changed all that much in the 8 years since this happened either. While Rab Florence wasn't strictly fired for his column, he felt that he had absolutely no choice but to leave Eurogamer after long discussions with his editor, Tom Bramwell. Tom's own editor's blog, posted a few days after the incident, said that he took no pleasure whatsoever in having to make the edits to Rab's column. But after taking legal advice, he didn't have much of a choice. It also revealed just how much anger had been thrown his way over the column. Other journalists had apparently been screaming their head off at him over publishing it, while some other folks, such as Kotaku's Stephen Tolito, commented that the whole thing really wasn't that big a deal and not worth making a comment over. It seems as though people were generally upset that Rab and his editor had rocked the apple cart and disturbed a somewhat unethical situation people are unhappy to take advantage of. Doesn't it? In these times before another DoritoGate plunged the world of gaming journalism into a truly terrifying hellscape of rage, ethics and armpit sweat, this incident warranted a gate suffix all of its own. DoritoGate. In the eyes of Robert Florence, the forces behind the controversy, and behind his exit, were far greater than the one journalist who had made those complaints. Someone far too unimportant to mention nowadays, frankly, or the site he'd written the column for. The fault instead was with the ridiculous libel laws that still somewhat hamstring retrospectives like this one, and the companies who make these hashtag competitions in the first place. You know, the ones who stick a bag of crisps in Jeff Keighley's hand and turn up his smile whenever it starts to droop. Much like Jeff Gerstmann, it wasn't too bad in the end. Rab continued writing comedy, talking about his other love of tabletop games, and eventually even reuniting with Ryan to bring back their much-loved internet games show, with not a solitary bag of cool original to be found anywhere. Rab's integrity is an example to all of us here on YouTube. Although if anyone at Pepsi happens to be watching this and they have a few multi-packs of 3D Doritos still lying around, I certainly wouldn't say no. Hello you. Thanks ever so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe to be first to see future Fact Hunt episodes. Click on the bell if you already are to make sure you're notified. And be sure to check out my other episodes. And if you want to be super awesome, check out my Patreon, where you can not only see Fact Hunt episodes early, but also completely ad and sponsorship free. But thank you ever so much again for watching, and I'll be seeing you next time. Ta-ra for now!